what's going on, what has happened between Israel and Turkey, the attack on Syria, which Israel is so much concerned about it because they said just moments ago we've learned that Israeli Mossad talked with the government in Syria with al-Shara al-Jilani, and they warned them about the Turkish activity in Syria. Then it seems that Benjamin Netanyahu said that they didn't take these, these signs that they were trying to send to the Turkey. They didn't take them seriously. So you see the attack coming, and there is some sort of, mm, I would say, concern on the part of Tom Brock. For example, the Trump administration, they see the risk of escalation between Israel and Turkey. And how do you put these things together? Because they have the election inside Israel. They're fighting. Netanyahu is fighting for its survival in Israel. On the other hand, they're somehow escalating the attacks in southern part of Lebanon, the attack on Syria, on Gaza, and there is no way to understand what's going on in Israel. What do you make of what's going on with these new attacks on Syria?
Basically, Bibi's in big trouble. So the polls and the prediction markets have about a 70% plus chance that Bibi Netanyahu loses the elections this October. And he loses it to the new Yashar party, founded by former IDF General Eisenkot, I think is how you pronounce his name. If I butchered it, my apologies, but I butcher everything when it comes to pronunciation. So he looks like he's going to skate in. And it appears that Bibi and the hard right parties may lose as much as half or more of their seats that they had from the prior election. And that, of course, isn't just political disaster for Bibi, but it's personal disaster for Bibi because it means his trials go back full scale. Most people that have evaluated the evidence in his trials, basically he shook people down for lots and lots of Cuban cigars, which I can understand. And Larry and I can both understand that particular habit, but not to shake down the use your government resources to do it, especially not in Israel, which has very strict rules against that. And then his wife would order barrels of champagne a day, basically. And Bibi stuck with her because he cheated on her way back in the 90s, got caught, ratted himself out thinking they were about to release a tape. It turned out there was no tape, but he was screwed already. So he's been stuck with her at the hip ever since. And she's a real slush. Wow. Shook down people, tax favoritism, this favoritism, that deal, this other deal. And the Israel lobby in the U.S. has always been deeply tied to Bibi and the Likud party in particular. That it's not the same Israel lobby for non-Bibi related parties. People can be people have been focused on Naftali Bennett. He is very unlikely. It's a 90% chance he's not the next prime minister. It's this Eisenkot guy who came out almost out of nowhere. And there's some hope in some circles that he will moderate Israel's position, principally because, before October 7th of 2023, he had floated the idea of a two-state solution for Israel. Now, he's not known as any kind of softy militarily. He's the guy who helped brainstorm the idea of collective punishment on communities in Lebanon to get at Hezbollah. So that's who he is militarily. But he's one of those go hard or get out kind of guys. Doesn't want, constant ground troops, doesn't want constant endless conflicts, doesn't want to get over his skis. So the assumption is that he would be much more likely than Bibi to withdraw Israeli presence from, encouraging the Iran war, southern Lebanon, Gaza, and in Syria. And so Bibi sees it as there's two things happening. One is there's a belief amongst the Bibi crowd in Israel that this may be their last chance. So that's why they're sort of going all to the wall on Gaza, all to the wall on Lebanon, all to the wall in Syria, all to the wall in Iran, all to the wall and trying to, provoke conflicts with Qatar and provoke conflicts with Turkey, and maybe behind, along with the Ukrainians, a lot of these various Ukrainian type groups, with these various false flag attacks on the UAE, on Egypt, on the Saudis, on the Turkish leaders. So and you could see it because one reason they're desperate is they think this is their last gasp. And the other reason they're desperate is they think that this is the only way they can reverse the election outcome. by creating maximum security risks and fright for the Israeli public. It appears that's what Bibi's going all in on. But it's not working. Alistair Crook has been following the Hebrew press. They've been detailing how basically Bibi's got a weapons of mass destruction in Iraq style scandal. That Israel's own military intelligence and the analyst level folks at the Mossad told Bibi that, in fact, Iran was nowhere near a nuclear weapon in terms of intentionality. They've always had the capacity, just not the intentionality. And that the Iran regime would not collapse, and that it would not be a 4 or 5 day war. And yet Bibi withheld and hid that information and lied to the President of the United States about what his own intelligence was telling him. And so that's going to blow up in a scandal at some point. So they have a brain drain problem in Israel. It's one of the campaign issues Eisenkot is running on, that they've been losing, some of their higher quality people over the last 3-4 years that don't want to be involved in this endless conflicts. So I think you're not going to see Bibi back down at all between now and election day. It's just not in his. Trump thought for a period of time that he could get him to back off in exchange for a Trump endorsement, thinking that would push him over the top. And that's what Kushner's message was when he went and visited. But you could tell by Kushner's behavior afterwards, where Kushner basically was very dismissive of the Hamas position after he had promised Hamas the opposite the day before. Was talking about, they'll be able to go in 60 to 90 days. So it's all trying to negotiate and navigate Bibi's own political self-interest and whether he blows up the world between now and election day just to save his own hide. And that's what's largely going on. The other factor that's going on is what appears to be Operation Gladio style, Cuban post-Batista style, the intelligence operations running all kinds of rampant false flags and terror type events across the Mideast. So I know you interviewed Professor Morandi, who identified that as a potential point of risk. And it's everywhere. People have to go back and look at it, how he did Operation Gladio, how he worked with organized crime during World War II, Lucky Luciani helping to set up, and that furthered into working with the Corsican mob that set up the French Connection and all of that. First thing we do when we go to Afghanistan is we make sure they get those poppy fields up and running, and get the opium flowing. Same thing in Vietnam with Air America, famously. But we did that in World War II with Lucky Luciano, who was one of the kings of the drug trade long before anyone else was. Same with the drug cartels in Colombia and Mexico in the 80s and the 90s, as detailed in a wide range of shows cinematically, but would show up in the actual legal record or journalistic record of people like Gary Waters. So we got in bed with these ugly folks because they're the best at human trafficking. They're the best at information laundering. They're the best at money laundering. They're the best at sabotage and saboteur and extortion and threat and bribery. It's going to be organized crime people who are good at that when you want to destabilize or take over a government or protect it from revolution or rebellion, which we were in the business of doing post-World War II. Then you get Operation Gladio, where we have these left-behind armies throughout Central and Eastern and even parts of Western Europe. Now these left-behind armies merged with aspects of organized crime. The goal was leave them behind so they would have arms stashes and already be trained in case of a Soviet invasion. That was the premise. Problem was who we went into bed with and what we left them with in terms of tools and techniques created all kinds of problems that showed up in terrorism and theft and various organized crime activity from Italy to the Netherlands in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, which we tried to suppress, but ultimately would come out. One of the biggest places we did Operation Gladio was Ukraine. So these are not the friendliest and nicest kind of folks to leave in power. Then you look at how we use the the Batista Cubans. Those Cubans are part of the Batista government that fled when Fidel took over. People like Felix Rodriguez shows up everywhere from killing Ernesto Che Guevara in Bolivia against U.S. orders, by the way, wearing his watch for the next 20 years that he would brag about, to showing up in the middle of Iran-Contra 20 years later. We use the Cubans as these kind of gray interspace kind of money launderer, information launderer, the kind of connections between the organized crime world and the institutional government world. And then the other advantage is, you tip into the drug trade or the gun trade or the human trafficking trade, and you create independent totally off the books cash for various intelligence operations on a global scale. It looks to me like we've done that with the Ukrainians. Makes sense. There was a place of all the Soros types, George Soros's favorite place in Ukraine, messing around after 1990. We had the vestigial aspect of Operation Gladio that went all the way through, creating a fake Ukrainian nationalism story, mostly founded out of Harvard in the 1970s. That retold the story of Soviet famines to be an anti-Ukrainian one, all that kind of jazz. But it looks like we've armed a lot of lunatics, neo-Nazi types, mercenary types. We've brought in Colombian cartel hitmen. We've brought in Islamic terrorists. We kind of used a lot of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in this way, and then later other groups across the sort of Wahhabi Sunni Islamic world. There's a reason why they keep showing up committing terrorism but never attack Israel. Kind of a get tell as to who it is that's funding him and backing him. And we even sent them to Ukraine, so we're putting them all together. Meet your Sunni Islamic terrorist brother with your organized crime brother, with your Colombian cartel brother, with your Ukrainian neo-Nazi. So I suspect they are showing up in all these places, that they could be in places like Israel, they could be in places like Egypt. They might explain these unexplained attacks, which we've been seeing sporadically, but have started to peak over the last month. And what's the connection? Bibi Netanyahu's in big political trouble in Israel. He needs everything to blow up, so it's so chaotic and the public is so scared, he gets reelected. That's his last gap of winning. And unfortunately, that's why I think we'll see an escalation of this rather than a diminution of this, despite Kushner's entreaties for him to cut a deal and be gentle, and in exchange get Trump's endorsement. It doesn't look like that persuaded Bibi.
Yeah. How do you see the conflict in the Persian Gulf and with the Strait of Hormuz? On one side, Donald Trump, he said yesterday that he stopped negotiating with the Iranians, which there were no negotiations, by the way, but he stopped those negotiations. And he's talking about strangling the Iranian economy and putting pressure on Iran. And this is the blockade going to continue. And they're talking about reducing the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump said one of the ways alternatives would be Texas, Louisiana, But there has, when you look at the situation, it seems that the two sides are sitting back, looking at each other, making their minds. What would be the next step? What would be the next move? How do you see the situation? The next move, what is that on the two sides, on the part of Iranians or on the part of the United States?
I think the Iranians are baiting Trump back into a conflict in a way that they consider they have the winning leverage, that it would escalate the economic harm to Trump right on the eve of the midterms, sink him in the midterms, and get a form of not only revenge, but a form of political and practical deterrence. Because a Trump with a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate is going to be spending all of his time, fighting off investigations and impeachments, and that isn't a good position to be in to try to wage war against Iran. I think it appears to me that's their logic. Now, it does, I wrote a Substack piece on the Iranian public opinion, and it was clear by October before this conflict that opinion had hardened. Iranian public went from agreeing with the supreme leader to not using or developing nuclear weapons to believing that Islam did support developing nuclear weapons. And this was before the war. And my guess is those numbers are in the high 60s, low 70s. So what you're seeing in the hardening of the public positioning of Iran in its leadership reflects and represents what they saw in the public. And if they had any doubts about it, the funeral and the reaction to the funeral of the Ayatollah and his 4-year-old granddaughter, that small little coffin in front of all the others, made it crystal clear where that public is. You had the Iranian president trying to make excuses for why it is they did any level of diplomacy. And they've always throughout escalated with Trump. In other words, if Trump rug pulls a deal, the wall got 10 feet higher, as Trump liked to put it during the Mexican wall in Mexico debate in 2016 presidential terms. So in other words, every time he rug pulled it, they were going to make him pay a higher price. They understand that they cannot reward Trump for rug pulling deals or for extortionate threats. And that's why the MOU went from being something they could discuss to no, now you have to deliver behaviorally on every one of these terms before we're going to open up the strait. So, end the blockade will open up the strait a little bit more. Release the funds, our frozen funds will open up the strait a little bit more. And the sanctions will open up the strait a little bit more. Reduce your military footprint in the Middle East will open up the strait a little bit more. So that's the deal. They're not going to rely on a deal. They're going to rely on behavior. And I think that's practical under the circumstances because Trump has shown himself deal incapable due to whether you attribute it, as I do, to a personality shift and a diminished mental health status based on what people very close to the president told me all the way back in January had been happening for months, or whether you just look at his behavior over the last 6 months. He can't stick to any deal. So you look at the practical realities for Trump, he can only BS his way so far. So Soros Scotty today is out there trying to double up the amount of buying the 30-year bond because it just hit the highest rate it's hit since the global financial crisis. Same with the 20 and 10-year. They keep flirting with those rates. Then you've got the Japanese yen carry trade, which he had to bail out the Japanese yen just last week because how much the Japanese hold of U.S. treasuries, and he didn't want them to start dumping en masse those treasuries on the market, not at this particular point in time, send yields skyrocketing. But at the same time, he needs the Japanese yen carry trade to keep forward because you could borrow in the yen at much cheaper interest rates than you could borrow in the U.S. And that money then funneled and fueled a large part of the Western equity boom. Well, those Japanese interest rates keep going up and up and up. It's not just the U.S. interest rates, German interest rates hitting record highs, French interest rates hitting record highs, waiting for the gilt in the U.K. to get back to another gilt crisis there. So this is a sign that the bond market is not liking what's going on the global stage. Then you've got, Trump keeps emptying the strategic reserves, pretending we don't have a problem. But you can BS your way on Fox News. Everybody goes to the pump and sees what the price is. Everybody that has to deal with diesel sees what the price is. Everybody that has to deal with jet fuel sees what the price is. And those prices are going up and up and up and up. And diesel is, of course, essential to the American economy because it's so important in the transportation of essential and necessary goods across our economy because America's a big old country. So those are realities he can't avoid. Those are realities he can't ignore. He can pretend they're not there, but voters can see them in live time. So the bond market is telling a different. Traditionally, the taco index has been established by the Deutsche Bank and others when the 10-year went over 4.5, when gas went over $4, and when his approval rating went into the 30s. Trump would taco. Well, his approval rating is around 33%. The gas is way over $4 a gallon consistently. It's some places the highest it's been in 20 years or 40 years, 50 years, depending on where you're at. The interest in the 10 years at 4.7 in climate. So all of that would say Trump's got a taco. Then you've got the kinetic limitations that Kane was so insistent on telling Trump about. He leaked it to somebody who Trump turned around and fired right before this all started. Hegseth has been screaming at him for that for a while. But once the attack in Jordan happened and Trump saw it in live time, he does realize he doesn't have either the offensive or defensive weapons he needs to be able to go back to a full-scale kinetic conflict with Iran. And Iran knows that too. That's why Iran realizes Trump is very vulnerable at the moment. The elections are upcoming. The economy is screaming. And his kinetic military vulnerability is as high as it's ever been, with massive attrition in morale amongst our soldiers and Marines and Air Forcemen who are writing things on planes like, be a good goy, go bomb Iran. We haven't seen this kind of level of protest publicly in the U.S. conflict since Vietnam. You have to go back to Vietnam and before it leaked out how many U.S. soldiers were deeply unhappy with that conflict and were not being well treated and well cared for. And it's not just the USS Lincoln. It's pretty much every ship in the region. It's large parts of, I've heard from a range of military people, I won't get into why, some of them reached out for legal reasons. But basically what they detailed months ago is what's happening now. And it was bad then. Imagine what it is now, because our whole we didn't plan for this. Planned for a 4-day war. So we had no logistics. It's like, what happened if they take out, how do you not game plan? What do we do if they take out the naval base in Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet base? What do we do? That apparently was the answer by our military experts. All those generals, they get more special little things on their little lapels there, all those little pins for how much they lose. right? They go, oh, no, I lost 9. No, you lost only 3. And that's what our generals are for. The utterly useless, other than to cash in and the military-industrial complex and go and say stupid crap on Fox that Trump sporadically buys into. He'll come back and say, what do you guys think about this? Some loony thing that either Keene or Kellogg or one of those other kooks said. And Kane will tell him again, no. Now, of course, along the way, he keeps flirting with, hey, maybe we could use some nukes. What do you think about some nukes? This is the 3rd time he's done this during the Iran war. And for the 3rd time, he was told at Camp David, no. But that's why it leaked out to Marjorie Taylor Greene, is because Trump was back on that train again. And they came out and quasi-denied it, but it concerned me they didn't fully deny it. I wanted him to do what he was forced to do the last 2 times this happened, which is to go on record and say, I would never do that, da-da-da. Instead, he acted like Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't know what she's talking about. Okay, just come out and say, no way on God's green earth would you ever use nuclear weapons, period, end of story, under these circumstances. And it kind of didn't this time, which is a little bit of a concern. So though there is strong resistance to even the idea of using it, but not from Trump himself, unfortunately, because his brain is kind of cooked. It's like the old, I don't know if you ever saw the old US 80s ads where they have the fried eggs frying. They say this is your brain on drugs. Well, it's basically the same as your brain on Laura Loomer. Is you end up like where Trump is at. But hopefully the rest of the world stays cool enough to make sure things don't blow up badly. But Trump is in a military, monetary, and political situation that he can't meaningfully escalate without more risk blowing back on him than blowing back on Iran. And he knows that.